You've probably heard of the Rothschilds, the banking dynasty that financed Europe's wars and rewrote its politics. But few remember the family who did the same in the East. They were called the Sassoons, exiles turned financiers, merchants turned monarchs of trade. They built fortunes from goods the world demanded and governments condemned. They mastered the global economy before it even had a name. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. The Sassoon story begins not in London or New York, but in Baghdad, in the old Ottoman Empire at the turn of the 19th century. David Sassoon was born in 1792, the son of the treasurer to the Ottoman governor. For generations, the Sassoons had been successful Jewish merchants, managing trade routes that stretched from Basra to Persia. But that prosperity came at a cost. In the volatile politics of empire, wealth always drew suspicion. When power shifted, the Sassoons fell out of favor. Persecution followed. In 1829, David fled Baghdad with nothing but his family, his faith, and his knowledge of trade. He ended up in Bombay, a humid, crowded colonial outpost under British control. It wasn't the empire's capital, but it was its artery, the link between Britain's mills and Asia's markets. For a refugee, it was both exile and opportunity. David Sassoon arrived with no formal education, no title, and no land. But what he did have was priceless experience. He understood supply chains before the word existed. He knew what the British wanted, what India could produce, and what China would buy. And above all, he knew that where there is instability, there is profit, if you have the courage to stay when others flee. He began small. Cotton, yarn, textiles, anything that could move through the ports. But he did something different. He built trust across cultures. He hired Jewish, Indian, and Arab merchants, spoke multiple languages, and understood that relationships, not contracts, built empires. In a city divided by caste, creed, and colonial hierarchy, Sassoon created something radical, a network that ignored borders. And then came the product that would make him rich and infamous: opium. The British East India Company had long monopolized the trade, exporting opium grown in India to China, where addiction was widespread and growing. The Chinese government had banned the drug, but demand never disappeared. Smuggling became the shadow economy of the 19th century, and Sassoon stepped into it with precision, not chaos. He didn't run opium dens or smuggling boats himself. He financed, insured, and supplied the trade, the banker behind the merchant behind the empire. His company, David Sassoon & Co., became a financial and logistical backbone of Britain's China trade. By the 1842nd, his ships were sailing under the Union Jack, his warehouses filled with goods bound for the East. To his critics, he was profiting from misery. To his defenders, he was doing what every empire did, turning vice into order, chaos into cash flow. But whatever your moral lens, the result was undeniable. David Sassoon became one of the richest men in Asia. By the 1852nd, he was financing factories, building ports, and establishing mills in Bombay that employed thousands. He built synagogues, hospitals, and schools, some of which still stand today. He reinvested his fortune not just in trade, but in infrastructure. He didn't just move goods, he built the roads. They moved on. This was the quiet genius of the Sassoon model. Profit wasn't the end goal, it was the means to build permanence. Every dollar earned in opium or cotton was turned into something tangible: property, ports, or industry. And it worked. When the American Civil War disrupted cotton supplies to Britain in the 1862nd, Indian cotton became vital and the Sassoons controlled it. When Chinese silver payments flooded the markets, they handled the exchange. Every global disruption became their local opportunity. But success brought competition, and empires don't share easily. The British East India Company eyed the Sassoons with suspicion. The Chinese authorities despised them. Rival merchant families tried to undercut them. Yet David Sassoon's network held strong partly because it was built on family. He sent his sons across the empire to Baghdad, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and London, each one establishing a new branch of the family business. They weren't just traders, they were ambassadors of capital. Wherever the British flag went, the Sassoons followed, financing its journey. By the time David Sassoon died in 1864, his fortune stretched across continents. His sons had become global financiers, his name synonymous with reliability in London and Hong Kong alike. Elias David Sassoon, his eldest son, expanded into China, opening offices in Shanghai and Hong Kong just as the ports were forced open by the Opium Wars. There, the Sassoon Empire